I want to share something that happened to me on November 14th, 2022, during a late-night drive I'll never forget. That night, I was alone on Route 19, traveling north toward a cheap roadside motel about 30 minutes away from Maple Junction, a quiet Pennsylvania town most people never hear about. It was 2:07 a.m., the kind of hour where the world feels too empty, and your mind starts noticing things it normally wouldn't. The sky had been threatening rain all day, and when it finally came, it came hard. Sharp, cold sheets of it slapping across the windshield. My wipers scraped frantically, barely keeping up. The storm swallowed almost everything beyond the faint cone of my headlights. For long stretches, the only sound inside the car was the steady hum of the engine and the occasional rattle when the wind pushed too hard against the frame. And even though I was running the heat on low, there was this uncomfortable coolness settling around my shoulders, almost like the air couldn't make up its mind if it wanted to be warm or cold. A few miles past a closed gas station, the kind with flickering signs and a handwritten "back at 8 a.m. taped to the dusty glass, I spotted something on the right shoulder. At first it looked like a trash bag or maybe a fallen road sign. But as I drew closer, it straightened, stood up, and stepped toward the edge of the road. It was a man, soaked completely through, head down, one hand lifted halfway in this hesitant, exhausted motion. Not even a full hitchhiker's thumb, just a gesture, a plea. Every instinct in me said don't stop. It was raining too hard. I was exhausted. It was late, and you never know who you meet on the road at this hour. But something about the way he stood there, small, shivering, alone in that brutal weather, made it feel wrong to keep driving. Like I would hear about his body being found on the news the next morning if I ignored him. So, against every bit of common sense I had, I pulled over. The car shook slightly as I came to a stop. He didn't open the door right away. He just approached slowly, like he wasn't sure I was real. Then, without a word, he pulled the back door open and climbed in. The moment it clicked shut, the temperature inside the car dropped. Not a mild chill, no. It felt like someone had opened a freezer behind my seat. I turned the heat up a little and tried to keep my voice steady. "Rough night, huh? Where you headed?" No answer. He sat directly behind me, rigid as a board, facing the passenger side window. I could see the back of his hood, dripping steadily onto the seat. His shoulders rose and fell, but slow. Too slow. The kind of breathing you hear from someone who's either freezing or deeply frightened. We drove in silence for a minute, just the rain pounding the roof. To ease the tension, I tried again. "You okay back there? Need medical help?" "A hospital." Still nothing. But I heard something, soft, strained. A whisper. I couldn't make out a single word. It was like he was speaking to the glass, or to himself, lips barely moving. I felt my skin crawl, but I kept driving. I told myself maybe he was in shock. Maybe he'd been walking for hours. Maybe English wasn't his first language. But the longer he whispered, the more wrong it felt. The words never got clearer, just this low, trembling murmur that rose and fell with the rhythm of the rain. About 10 minutes later, we reached a stretch of road where the storm briefly weakened. Enough for me to breathe. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 2:19 a.m., and that's when I decided to ask him something simple, something normal. "You want me to turn the heat up a little more?" I turned my head halfway toward the mirror, and he wasn't there. No sound of a door opening. No shift in the seat. The back seat was completely empty. I slammed the brakes so hard the tires skidded on the wet asphalt. Rain hammered the windshield as I whipped around. Heart hammering in my throat, nothing. Just the dark, wet imprint where he had been sitting. The shape of a person. Head. Shoulders. Arms pressed close to the sides. The outline glistened in the dim light, like water still clinging to the fabric. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or keep driving. But the road was dead silent except for the storm, and something inside me told me not to stay put. So I started the car again, and drove the last 8 minutes to the Maple Pine Motel. A rundown building with buzzing neon lights and a parking lot full of potholes turned into miniature lakes by the rain. I pulled in at exactly 2:27 a.m. and parked under the flickering canopy light. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I forced myself to look into the back seat one more time. The wet imprint was still there, larger now, like water had spread. I grabbed my bag and rushed inside to check in. The clerk barely looked up from his phone as he handed me the keycard. I must have looked pale because he asked if everything was all right. I lied, said it was just the weather. I don't know why I didn't tell him. Maybe I knew how crazy it sounded. The next morning, when the storm had passed and the sun was thinly pushing through the clouds, I returned to my car. The seat was dry. The imprint was gone. For a moment, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. That exhaustion had played tricks on me, a hallucination brought on by stress and rain and darkness. That's what I believed. Until the motel manager knocked on my door around noon. He looked unsettled. "Sir," he said, "you left your car under our canopy last night, right?" I nodded. "We were checking the outdoor cameras because one of the lights is broken." He hesitated. "Something strange showed up. You may want to see it." I followed him to the tiny office where an old monitor displayed grainy black and white footage from the parking lot. He rewound it to 2:27 a.m., the moment I pulled in. There I was, car stopping, me opening the driver's door, stepping out with my bag. I watched myself walk out of frame toward the entrance. Then, about 3 seconds later, the rear passenger side door of my car slowly opened. No one stepped out. No figure, no movement. But the door hung open for a full 8 seconds, before gently closing itself. And in that dim, static-filled footage, I swear, it looked like the rain was falling through something standing there. The manager paused the video and looked at me. "What were you driving with last night?" he asked quietly. I didn't have an answer, and the truth is, I still don't. I want to talk about something that happened to me on June 3rd, 2021, during a late-night drive through the Nevada desert. It's the kind of experience I've tried for years to rationalize, but every explanation I come up with falls apart the moment I think about the details. That night, I was driving from Ely to a remote worksite southwest of Tonopah. The entire stretch between those towns is made of silence, darkness, and desert. My shift the next morning started early, so instead of stopping at a motel, I made the mistake of pushing through the night. It was 1:42 a.m. The moon was thin, barely visible, and the desert around me looked like an endless sea of charcoal. Shadows stretched across the highway in ways that made the landscape feel unfamiliar, even though I'd driven it before. For the first hour, everything was manageable, but sometime after 2:10, the fuel gauge dipped lower than I expected. I had miscalculated. There were no known stations open at this hour, not out here. My GPS lost its signal minutes earlier, leaving the map frozen and useless. The anxiety settled in slowly at first. That kind of quiet panic where you keep checking the fuel gauge, as if hoping the numbers will magically rise. The highway was empty. No headlights behind me, no taillights in the distance. Nothing but the occasional tumbleweed bouncing across the road. I told myself I had enough to make it to the next town. But by 2:26, the warning light came on. The glowing amber symbol felt like a countdown. I started thinking about what I'd do if the car stalled. Would I wait until morning? Try walking? Out here, with the cold desert wind and no reception, neither option felt safe. Then, just as I crested a small hill, something appeared in the distance, a faint glow. Weak, flickering, but unmistakably artificial. It didn't match anything I remembered on this route. As I got closer, the glow sharpened into an old rectangular sign attached to a metal pole. "Open 24 hours." The words pulsed weakly in faded red neon. A wave of relief washed over me. I didn't care how run down it looked or how out of place it felt. It meant fuel. It meant I wasn't going to end up stranded in the desert at 3 in the morning. The station looked like it had been abandoned in the 1980s. A cracked concrete lot, dusty windows, a rusted ice machine with half its letters missing. But the pumps were lit, humming quietly under the canopy. I pulled up to the nearest pump at 2:34 a.m. and swiped my card, expecting an error message. Instead, the screen blinked once and displayed, "Transaction approved. Begin fueling." That alone should have made me suspicious. The card readers on these old pumps never work. But I was tired, I was desperate, and in that moment I didn't want to question anything. After filling the tank, I decided to go inside and buy some water before getting back on the road. The door opened with a stiff tug, like it hadn't been used in years. Inside, the air felt still, stale in a way that reminded me of storage units or sealed attics. The only sound was a buzzing fluorescent light struggling to stay alive. Behind the counter sat an elderly man wearing a faded blue work shirt. He didn't move when I walked in, didn't greet me, didn't even glance up. I assumed he was asleep with his eyes open, if that was possible. His posture was stiff, his hands clasped together on the counter. I grabbed a bottle of water from a cooler that hummed unevenly, its light flickering. When I placed it on the counter, he finally looked at me, slowly, like someone turning to face a noise they weren't sure they heard. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with heavy bags. His skin looked pale, almost gray. He gave me this strange, strained smile, too wide, too long, and didn't blink once. Just this, I said. He didn't scan it. He didn't move his hands. He simply whispered, "You shouldn't stay on this road after 3:17. The way he said it made every hair on the back of my neck rise. Not as a warning, not as advice, as a fact, a rule, something he'd seen happen before. My voice cracked as I asked, "Why? What happens at 3:17? He inhaled slowly, like the answer physically hurt him, then repeated, "Don't stay on this road after 3:17. Exactly the same tone, same cadence, same strange smile. I didn't wait for anything else. I dropped a few bills on the counter, backed out of the store, and got into my car as fast as I could. When I checked the clock, it read 2:51 a.m. I drove away faster than I should have, adrenaline shaking my hands on the wheel. The gas station lights shrank in my rearview mirror until they dissolved back into darkness. For the rest of the drive, I kept glancing at the dashboard clock. 3:02, 3:07, 3:13. Every shadow on the road felt like it was waiting for something. Waiting for me. And though nothing happened, the air itself felt wrong, like the desert was holding its breath. When I finally reached the town limits of Tonopah, the clock turned 3:17, and the tension in my body snapped all at once. I made it. I was safe. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The next morning, exhausted but curious, I drove back toward Ely to find that gas station. I had kept track of the mile markers. I knew exactly where it should have been. But when I reached the spot, there was nothing. Just sand, scrub, and an old billboard with the metal frame rusting away. No foundation, no canopy, no pumps, no store. Not even broken concrete. I drove a few more miles in both directions just to be sure. Nothing. When I finally got cell service, I checked my bank account. There was a new transaction posted. A charge for fuel stop near zero approved. $38.17. Every attempt to look up the business online led nowhere. No match, no records. Nothing that should exist, but the charge is still on my statement. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving long desert highways, I catch myself watching the clock without meaning to, wondering what actually happens on that road at 3:17 a.m. I want to share a story that still keeps me awake at night, even though it happened more than a year ago. It took place on August 11th, 2023, during one of the hottest days of the summer. That afternoon, I was driving along Highway 54, a long, empty stretch of road that cuts through the southern part of New Mexico. I had been on the road since early morning, heading home from a work trip. The temperature outside hovered around 103 degrees, and the sun looked like a white disk burning straight through the windshield. By 4:18 p.m., my air conditioning was losing the battle. The vents pushed out air that felt only slightly cooler than the outside heat, and sweat kept gathering behind my neck as the miles slipped by. The highway ahead shimmered with that illusion of water, heat waves rising off the pavement like the desert was trying to trick me into believing it was alive. Traffic was nearly non-existent. One car every 15 minutes, maybe. The land around me was nothing but dry grass, sand, and the occasional scrub bush hanging on for dear life. You could go an hour without seeing a building. That's why, When I spotted a person walking along the shoulder, thumb raised, I slowed down almost automatically. He was wearing a faded denim shirt and carrying a backpack that looked far too heavy for the day's heat. His hair was dark, a little overgrown, and he was walking with the sluggish determination of someone who hadn't had shade or rest in a long time. I told myself it wasn't smart to pick up hitchhikers anymore, but out there, in that heat, leaving him alone felt wrong, dangerous even, so I pulled over. He jogged the last few feet and opened the passenger door. "Thank you," he said, breathless but polite. His voice was warm, steady. "I really appreciate it. I didn't think anyone would stop." I told him it was too hot to be walking out there and asked where he was headed. He pointed toward a small town called Alamito, about 40 minutes down the highway. He introduced himself simply as Aaron, and I gave him my name in return. At first, everything felt normal. He seemed friendly, mid-30s, maybe early 40s, with the kind of easy smile that made him look trustworthy. The conversation flowed naturally. We talked about the heat, the highway, and the lack of civilization out there. He was soft-spoken, the kind of person who chooses his words carefully, and he never once made me feel uneasy. Not yet. The only strange thing I noticed was how observant he was. He pointed out landmarks I hadn't seen, commented on things I'd left in the cup holders or on the dashboard. Subtle things, but nothing alarming. As we talked, the sun dipped lower in the sky, swapping harsh white light for a dull orange glow. By 5:03 p.m., it was low enough that long shadows stretched across the highway. The temperature finally dropped under 100. We eventually approached a small roadside stop, nothing more than a bus turnout with a faded bench and a crooked sign. "That's me," he said, gathering his bag. "My connection stops here." As soon as I pulled over, a bus rolled into view from the opposite direction. It braked with a slow hiss and began loading passengers. Aaron tugged open the door of my car and stepped out with an appreciative smile. "Thank you again," he said, adjusting his backpack. "Not many people stop anymore. You're kind. Rare." I smiled back, told him to stay safe, and watched him jog toward the bus. He had already placed a foot on the first step when he turned sharply, as if he had forgotten something. He looked right at me, directly into the car, meeting my eyes through the open door, and he said something that froze every muscle in my body. "Take care, little star." I felt everything inside me go cold. Little Star. That was a nickname only my grandmother ever called me. She died in 2018, and no one else, no friend, no coworker, not even my parents, ever used it. It wasn't written anywhere. Not online, not in messages, not on social media. It was private, personal. There was no possible way he could have known it. Before I could react, before I could demand how he knew that name, he turned away and stepped fully onto the bus. The doors closed instantly behind him, and the vehicle pulled away in one smooth motion. I sat there, heart pounding in my ears, replaying the moment, the way he had said it, the confidence in his voice, like he knew exactly what the nickname meant to me, like he had always known. I waited until the bus disappeared down the highway, swallowed by the heat-blurred horizon. Then, I pulled back onto the road, trying to convince myself I had misheard. Maybe he said something else. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the heat messed with my head. But as the sun finally dipped behind the desert ridge and the sky turned purple, one thought kept circling in my mind, refusing to leave. He said it the exact way she used to. Same tone, same warmth, same familiar softness. And the more I replayed our conversation, the more I realized something else. He never once asked me for my name.